Hi everyone, welcome to this video. So straight off the bat, what is this video about? Well, this is a walkthrough to recreate my Maven Remote Work Challenge dashboard. I've had a few requests to show how I technically created this dashboard, so I've put this video together. This complements the blog post I put together on the strategy I employed to develop it. I'm going to note here that any of the links that I talk about will be listed in the details below. Okay, so now that's defined, you may then ask me, hey Jared, this is a really long video. Why should I invest my time to watch it? Well, I would actually agree. Yes, it is pretty long. It's much longer than anything I have made previously. But I wanted to show everything together in one go, rather than just a few snippets. In addition, in recreating this dash, I will be using the following tips and tricks, which I think are really beneficial and some real time savers and problem solvers. These include using Power Query to unpivot and pivot tables, Power Query to create conditional columns, using Power Query to remove specific text, using a custom rank value to sort chart axes by category rather than values, appending tables to Power Query, using colors to combine legends and titles, custom formatting of charts, decluttering charts and applying some of the Gestalt principles of design. That's quite a lot actually. So if you want to see these and maybe some more, stay tuned. There's also a little surprise near the end. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, so we're going to look at how we can reproduce the vast majority of these visualizations and add-ons to create an overall report or dash. We will first look at productivity, then morale, and finally the remote working timing and policy. So without further ado, let's get to it. Okay, so we will look at recreating these three bar charts for productivity. If I look at my 2021 Excel datasheet, I've highlighted two questions I used. One relates to people's own perception of changes in productivity from working remotely. This uses an intermittent scoring scale from 50% less productive up to 50% more productive. The 2020 survey has a very similar question, which I will use to compare. There is then another question targeting people who are managers and asks them how remote working has affected the productivity of their team members. It uses the same scoring scale, so it is a useful comparison for us. Okay, so to make this, I will go to Power Query, where I have created a duplicate of the 2021 file to show you my process. My feeling is that having 10% increments potentially overcomplicates things, as it creates 11 potential responses. So I want to actually consolidate these responses from 11 different categories down to 5 to make it more digestible for the end user. Here, I select the question, then add a condition. For the first one, I'm grouping 30, 40, and 50% more productivity under the category of much more productive. Then for 20 and 10% more productivity, I'm going to classify that as more productive. I'll have similar descriptions for the negative productivities, and for any 0% change, I will just mark this as the same. Then, at the very end, I'll add a null value for the else, just as good practice. This takes a little time to complete, so I've sped up this video here, but it's worth it to get the desired effect in the end. Now that has been executed, you can see the result here in a new column. Technically, you could just overwrite the values in the existing column. That is actually possible. I do have a separate video that deals with that technique. So looking at my original files I used for the challenge, you will see I performed a similar step for the manager's question to consolidate the answers. And here it is again for the 2020 survey. Next, to link the 2020 and 2021 files, I created a simple lookup using the 5 consolidated categories as shown. Here I have also included a ranking column using 1 as the most productive and 5 as the least productive. This will help us later to format the axis of the charts we create. So now we can close and apply. So now to recreate the charts, I first need some standard DAX calculations. You can do this in a single step using variables which I will show later, but I've kept them separate here to start with. We have a basic count to start. Then we create a count all using the all function to remove any filters. Finally, to calculate the overall percentage, we divide the count by the count all. It's as simple as that, really. So for the bar charts, we pull in the productivity rating from the lookup table, then the percentage values from each of the 2020 and 2021 files. I also add the ranking number values as a tooltip. You will see why now. If I click on the ellipsis, you will see I can now choose to order by ranking number, allowing me to arrange the y-axis from the most productive to the least productive. I can now move to formatting. Here this is more about personal preference, but here are the steps that I used. I removed the title and the legend, and then remove the x-axis. Now I color the bars to distinguish between 2020 and 2021, on which values are actually greater or less. Next, I have used data labels. This is just my preference for consistency with the other charts. Just to tidy up, I adjust the font size and format. The reason it looks large here is that it will be brought into a larger canvas area later. I then adjust the margin value so the category descriptions are visible. This is a key tip, as often you will see incomplete or unreadable categories in Y and X axes. Finally, I adjust the Y axis title. There you have it. The first chart is done. Let's quickly do the next two. For this viz, I just need a simple DAX calculation to subtract the 2021 value from the 2020 value. I add another bar chart and order the axis using the same ranking trick I used earlier. I wanted to use a common y-axis with the first chart, so here I'm removing all axes and their titles and using data values with common formatting. For coloring, I could use conditional formatting if this was to be used as a live report. For my purposes, I opted to manually color, emphasizing the positive change in more productive with dark blue and less productivity with a light red. Finally, with the manager's viewpoint, I used the same DAX calculation steps to calculate the percentage value. Now for this example, instead of going through all the formatting steps, I'm going to use the paste format function from the previous chart. In my opinion, this is a great time-saving tip if you're creating similar types of charts within your dashboard. For this one, I wanted to focus just on the percentage of managers who felt their team had improved productivity and use a blue color to show that. And then, just to tidy up, I'm adjusting the spacing between the bars to give a more consistent feel across all the visuals. Once this was done, I tried to use an example of Gestalt's principle of common region to connect all three charts and effectively separate the regions into three types: more, less, and same productivity. Now, I did this by simply adding two lines that run across all three charts. Another tip here is that your charts may automatically have a white background as standard. You can remove this white background in the effects bar as shown here. This allows my lines to be shown without using layer orders. I don't need the lines to be a prominent color, just noticeable. The charts can then be adjusted to align correctly. Now that is done, I can remove the charts I was attempting to replicate and add a title. Here is my tip for effectively using your chart title to also act as a legend. Once I type in the title, I can format the color of the year values to match the bar colors, making sure that the other text is not the same color. It's a little less obvious in this example, and it works better when you have contrasting colors, but I think it has the effect. Now, I can create the other titles and make some final adjustments, and I'm pretty much done with my first three visuals, and I can move on to the rest. So here we want to recreate the bubble chart. This one looks at occupational groups and which ones have an increased likelihood to experience high productivity and which have an increased likelihood of experiencing low productivity. I will look at the data in Power Query. If I skim over the question in the 2021 survey and look at the different occupations and the variety of answers, there appears to be a high-level category of occupations that are similar, and they are separated from a more detailed second level by a dash delimiter. What I want to do here is only look at the higher level categories. To do that, I will just extract the data from before the dashed delimiter. Now this creates a new column at the end of the table, as we see here. Again, I had done this already, as we can see here again. Another quick tip is that if you have categories with long names, it can make them hard to read in the visuals. Therefore, if possible, I like to rename the categories and give them shorter names. I have a few examples here where I can right-click and replace particular values within a column. Now we have that finalized, I can save and return to the chart creation. Taking a quick look at the DAX to use here, first the high productivity percentage. I am dividing the number of people with high productivity ratings by the total number of personnel. The high productivity rating is just a simple count of people with an OR logical filter for either more productive or much more productive. For lower productivity, we use much the same formula, just swapping the filter out for much less productive or less productive. Okay, so now we move on to building the bubble chart or scatter chart. First, I drop the percentage low productivity in the x-axis and the percentage high productivity in the y-axis. Next, I drop the newly created occupation group in the legend, and you see the scatters now starting to form. I drop the number of personnel measure in the size. Now it is a matter of formatting the chart. Firstly, again, I will remove the legend and title. Another tip for bubble charts, you will often see that values that appear to be cut off where the axis has been automatically limited. To overcome this, you can adjust the range of your Y and X axes manually. Next, I turn off the grid lines, and I want to replace those with what are almost quadrant lines, using the average values for high and low productivity. Now I will purposely color the bubbles, highlighting the occupations with either higher or lower rates of productivity, then add labels for each directly on the chart itself. I also change the color of the constant lines to complement the chart. Finally, I will increase the font size of the axis values and write 2 custom axis titles. And that's me pretty much done here. In the main dash I used, I actually removed the axes. It was more about looking at the relative differences. I also used colored arrows for each axis label. So that basically completes the charts used for productivity. These were then just reinforced with text, which was appropriately formatted with bold and colored text to highlight and draw attention to key points. It was also important to lay the charts out in a form of hierarchy to tell a story ranging from comparing overall productivity through to management assessment, and finally looking at a slightly more granular level of occupations. Next, we move on to the morale visuals. All the heavy lifting is actually done in Power Query. Before we jump in there, I'll briefly look at the questions I'm going to look at in Excel. There are 16 questions which ask the respondents which barriers worsened or improved as a result of remote working over the 6 months prior to the 2021 survey. It looks at things like motivation, costs, connectivity, etc. There were other questions related to barriers between workplace and remote workers, but the repeated iterations of some answers made me think it would be quite difficult to get meaningful insights from them. Looking at the actual survey file, we can see the columns with the questions I'm going to look at. Okay, so I will first show you what we want to create to allow us to make the visual. The first step I want to do here is create a duplicate of the 2021 file and isolate those 16 questions. It's a little bit of a pain to scroll and select the columns I want to use. If anyone has a quick tip for this, drop it in the comments below, please. I would really appreciate it. So once I select all the columns I wish to keep, I select Remove Other Columns, and now I'm left with just those questions and the response ID. Now pay attention here. This is where the magic happens. I select the response ID column, then go to the Transform tab on the ribbon and select Unpivot Columns, then select Unpivot Other Columns. Boom! We now have all the questions for each respondent in one single column. Now for the next trick, I want to get rid of these overlong questions. So I select Extract and then text after delimiter and then just enter dash and space. Now we have our simple barrier categories. And opposite, we have 6 values. For me, the 6 categories are maybe too many for the visual that I want to show. I want to simplify it to show whether it either simply worsened or improved. The difference between somewhat and significant is not really defined enough to warrant attention, in my opinion. So I will add a conditional column to consolidate these values. This is similar to what I have done earlier. Once that is done and saved, I now have my 3 values, and this will match what I have created earlier. There is no DAX here, and this is fairly straightforward to create because of the cleaning done in Power Query. I drop the barrier in the axis, value summary in the legend, and the number of respondents in the values. I arrange the categories in alphabetical order, then adjust the colors, red for the worsened values, dark blue for the improved, and a neutral grey for those that remain the same. Next, I had looked at the barrier categories that may impact morale, rather than some kind of technical issue. I may be wrong with some of these choices, but I thought it was appropriate to focus on motivation, isolation, health, collaboration with workers, and potential poor management. Using the filter bars allows this to be easily done. Once selected, I look to remove the title and adjust the legend to place it at the bottom. Now I remove the x-axis and y-axis titles and increase the size of the legend and y-axis fonts and adjust the area width to accommodate the categories. Next, I adjust the inner padding space slightly so that it sits right. To finish the chart off, I add in the data labels, changing the decimal points and size appropriately. Now to finalize, I'll add a custom title with some color formatted text for added emphasis, and then size and place. Now I'm done with the morale chart. So now I will move on to the slope chart, which is looking to compare the average hours used in daily tasks for those that work in a standard workplace versus those that work remotely, to see if there are any trends that would support increased morale or general well-being. To create this, I need to again look at transforming the existing data in Power Query. So in Power Query, using a duplicate copy of the survey file, I select the columns that contain the hours assigned for each daily task, as well as the response ID column. Like before, I choose to remove all other columns. Now I have my selected columns. I perform the same type of unpivot I did earlier. Again, like before, I can now adjust the values in each category by extracting text after a delimiter. This makes my life easier to identify the categories. Now I actually re-pivot the same category columns back again. Now I have effectively created a simple standalone table for workplace hours. I maybe could have done this using Summarize or Summarize Table in DAX, but I think this is a good alternative to practice. Now I want to add a new column to identify this table as workplace hours. I'm doing this because I wish to produce a replica of this table only for remote working hours and then append it to 2 tables into one. Okay, so next I will quickly perform the same steps for the remote working hours. Now I will append the two tables into one new table. And now we have our new combined table that I can use to create the slope graph. Here's the one I created when I originally performed the challenge. So now I can just close and apply. Okay, so before starting the build, I'm just pointing out that I created some simple average DAX measures for each daily task as shown here. Alright, so now let's get to it. First, I drop in a line chart. From the appended table, add the location in the axis, and then add all of our daily task categories in as values. You will see the general form taking shape. Now it's a matter of formatting. I will remove the y-axis but retain the x-axis. Then I remove the legend and title. So we're getting closer now. Next, I want to adjust the y-axis scale to give a better distribution and show the 0. Next, I'm going to work on the colors. I want to draw focus on the commute time and the personal time, as I see the reduction in commute time contributing to people having more personal time as a result of remote work. So I will use emphasis for these categories. I increase the thicknesses to make it more visible and add markers to demarcate the change points. Now I add labels as a replacement for the legend and then adjust the font sizes and coloring on the remaining aspects to match and further add emphasis. Again, another trick is that you can overwrite the value names to give more manageable labels in your charts. This is something I use a lot. Some final updating to finish, and we are done. I will now move on to the last chart type visual, which looks at the degree of remote working people we'd like to have after the pandemic is finished. Here I have distilled the survey information to show the range of days people would like to have remote working. The DAX formula is created by dividing the number of personnel favouring a particular time frame by the total number of respondents. For one last time, we delve into Power Query to prepare the data for this visual. Okay, so here's a sneak peek of what I will recreate. I want to translate the percentage values from the survey question into day values. Here, the question gives the example of 20% being the equivalent of 1 day. I will go through the main steps that are recorded here in the Power Query applied steps. If I go back to the full table, I can find the questions we are wanting to isolate. Once I find it and check it is the one, I want to remove all the other columns. This leaves me with the response ID and the answers to the question. So now I want to convert these values into equivalent day values. Now I did that using a conditional column again, similar to what I did for the previous visuals. Here you will see, for example, I've assigned 80%, 90%, and 100% as anywhere between 4 and 5 days. 60% to 70% is 3 to 4 days, and so on. So now I have my new column with the values I want. As before, I simply close and apply and go back to create the visual. As mentioned before, the manipulation of the data in Power Query means I only need very simple DAX to recreate the visual. To create it here, I select the horizontal bar chart, drop in the percentage values in the values, and the day intervals in the axis. I want to order the axis by the number of days rather than the values, so comparisons are easier to make. Now the structure is there, it's time to format. So again, I remove the y-axis title and format the y-axis values. Next, remove the x-axis altogether. Now I want to adjust the bar colors. I want to highlight the two extremes of those wanting almost complete remote work and those wanting minimal or no remote work. So I use my set colors to do that. I want the bar spacing to complement the other bar charts and data labels for the bar values as shown. Finally, I remove the title, which I can add in the main dash. I have used several aggregated percentage numbers for supporting data on this dashboard. Here is an example looking at the values for retention and recruitment, and the DAX I used to create them. In this one, I used variables to consolidate 3 steps into one and calculate the percentage values in one measure. For these ones, I created another separate table. You don't necessarily need to create a new table for each visual. I just preferred it for this challenge. The table was created using the same unpivot trick, which I have done a few times now. I further consolidated the 6 answers into just 3, which were agree, disagree, or same stroke no change. Just re-looking at the DAX, the first line is just a simple count. The second line counts again and removes filters, and the final one just divides both values to give a percentage. Now for this card visual, I can just use the filter values to get the percentage I wish to show, agreeing that offering remote work improves retention. So apart from the titles and layout, that creates most of the dashboard. For anyone who wishes to see how I arrange my visuals on the dashboard in high-speed capture, stay tuned. Another tip here that some may not know is that you can format the page and set the canvas settings to custom sizing. Here I've chosen 1950 by 2560 pixels. Okay, so just sit back and watch how I would copy the visuals I created into each separate page into a final dash layout. I made the decision that all content would be from within the Power BI platform itself, using standard visuals and inserts of shapes and lines, with no external pictures, logos, backgrounds, or third-party charts. I used shapes and colors to break the dash up into separate areas for productivity, morale, and policy. I also used some backgrounds to make each title pop a little, along with minor use of color. For text boxes, I used the bold font and color where I wanted to either highlight a point or reinforce that a point was potentially positively or negatively geared towards remote work. Here I show the building of one of the percentage cards and the use of filters. This isn't quite the finished product, but it gives you a good idea of the process I used. With a few additional steps, you'll be able to finalize and achieve something like this. I realize this has been a bit of a mammoth session, and thanks to anyone who has stuck through to the end. Let me know below if you got this far, or if you have any questions on any aspect of this dashboard. One final tip. I see a lot of people posting screenshots or pictures of their dashboards or reports in LinkedIn. To get a clear, readable version, you should export a PDF copy and upload the PDF as a document when you post. Everyone will be able to see all the detail you have included without any blur that you may get from a JPEG or a PNG file. This has been my first video for quite a while, and it took a couple of weeks just to put together and finalize. It's not the most polished video I've ever done, but hopefully you find it of use. If you need to discuss any aspect of this video, you can hit me up on Twitter or in LinkedIn or on my blog, or else just comment below. Okay, that's all for now. Thank you.